Hello everyone, welcome to Trinity Church. Right now I'm on Broadway and Wall Street. This is one of the oldest churches in all of New York City. It's an Episcopal church, originally Anglican, and it was built back in the late 1600s. The lands were first established in 1696. And it's a gorgeous church. This is the third iteration, built by the architect Richard Upjohn in this beautiful Gothic style. Earlier today, I did a Facebook Live of the tour of the graveyard of this church. So I'm just going to give you a 360 journey through this graveyard so you can enjoy the beauty of this graveyard on this rainy New York City day. So let's walk around, admire the architecture around us. Now, Trinity Church, when it was established in 1696, part of the Church of England, was granted the lands around it, including the shoreline, all down there, and all the lands surrounding it, extending all the way to Greenwich Village. Now, these lands, in the past 300 years, have become one of the most expensive real estate in all of the world. So this church right here, Trinity Church, is worth more than $3 billion. They own all these buildings that you see. Well, they lease the space for all these buildings that you see around here. Most of the buildings that we're surrounded by were built in the early 1900s in the huge construction boom of the late period of the Gilded Age. So let's walk around. Let me show you of the graveyards. People have been buried here since the 1690s, and this is probably one of the most exclusive places to get buried in all of New York City. So here we have a bunch of different graveyard burial sites. You'll see some of them are built out of brownstone, like this one over here. Brownstone, and you see these beautiful angelic faces on them. Great calligraphy, great topography, great stonework. Right next to it we have limestone. Now unfortunately limestone weathers a whole lot faster, so limestone hasn't lasted quite as much. Now beneath our feet we're just seeing gravestones, but beneath our feet are these huge vaults where up to 10 people can be buried underneath one single gravestone. Over here we have the Asteroid Cross, which is dedicated to the Astor family, one of the most prominent families in all of New York City history. They made their massive amounts of wealth during the Gilded Age of New York City in the late 1800s. And the Astors owned pews right at Trinity Church. It was one of the most expensive places to own a pew. A pew means like you can basically buy a seat. And the closer you were to the altar, the more expensive it was. And the seats were nice and plushy and beautiful. And the Astors were patrons of this church for quite a while. And here we have a depiction of the Old Testament. So here we have Adam and Eve right there with the snake around Adam and Eve. There might be an apple somewhere around there. Here we have a depiction of Seth Abraham. His face is mostly torn off, which makes it look very eerie. We have Isaac or Enoch or Jesse. Very, very Old Testament. And we have Noah and his ark right in his hands. It's a beautiful cross if you look up. Very ornate. So we have all the different figures here. We have Noah on the bottom, and then we have Jacob, and we have David on top. Look at all the gorgeous architecture around here. Now, the cool thing about the architecture is stayed much in line with the architecture you see here at Trinity Church. Now, Trinity Church is building their headquarters right here with a building that is in the same brownstone color as the church itself. Now, this building is going to house their art collection, which is going to be which is currently worth more than $1 billion. So not only do they own $3 billion worth of land, they own $1 billion worth of art. quite a well-off church. We have the American Stock Exchange here, right behind it. And only a few blocks away, about 6 or 7 blocks away, we have the shore. So let's walk around, right around here. We'll show you another graveyard. So we're walking through this beautiful graveyard here. Ooh. Carrying an umbrella in the 360 camera is a bit challenging. So this church is open to the public. Anyone can come inside. It's open most of the day, pretty much every single day. And you can come in here and relax, sit on one of the benches, read, enjoy the history as you're walking around. There's staircases that go down to the bottom level. Now, the shore, the Manhattan shore used to be right here as the church slopes down. The shore actually used to just gently slope onto the Hudson River, and the church was right on the shore, which was a very interesting location for a church at that time. But to put it into context, Manhattan isn't that big. It's a very skinny island. However, with New York City increasing in its size, not only rising up, reaching for the skies, also reached for the waters and extended out, making these huge land-filled areas, which is most of the East Financial District. So most of the World Trade Center, Battery Park City, is landfill. Now, this is not the church that was survived the collapse of the Twin Towers. That was a few blocks away, St. Paul's Chapel. However, this church is also one of the oldest churches in all of New York City. It still stands today in all of its grandeur. Now, this used to be the tallest thing in New York City for more than 200, 300 years, until the Brooklyn Bridge was constructed in 1883. Now, the Brooklyn Bridge was a little bit controversial because you couldn't really have things that were taller than a church, than the main church of a city. That was the case in Europe. There was barely any skyscrapers in Europe because they couldn't build taller than the cathedrals that were the centerpiece of each city. So, Brooklyn Bridge decided to reach a midpoint with the church. In order to not piss them off too much for having such a large building that towers over the church, they decided to make it in the same Gothic style as the church. So that's why the two original towers of the Brooklyn Bridge, which you still see today, are in that Gothic style. Looks almost like if they were a part of the church itself. And with this being an ever-growing city, they allowed the Brooklyn Bridge to build higher, and which resulted in kind of a open doors for the rest of the city to reach for the skies, while the churches stayed pretty much the same height. Right in front of us, we have the gravestone for Angelica Schuyler Church. Angelica Schuyler Church was the sister-in-law of Alexander Hamilton, and she's depicted in the show Hamilton as having a love triangle with Alexander and Eliza. So especially in the rainy days, it's beautiful to walk around these churches. So the church is going to connect directly via a path into the new building. Now, there used to be, the old headquarters used to be here, and that path does predate this new construction. You see these huge brownstone blocks on the church. Really cool. solid like a rock. Now the church is currently being remodeled, however you can still access the chapel in the backside of the church. It's open to the public. Soon, hopefully, they will be remodeling the church and it'll be more grander than it ever was before. New York City never ends with its construction. Let's go up through here. And this is the most popular side of the church, of its graveyard. So right here, as we walk through these muddy parts, we have the gravestone of Hercules Mulligan, who was the very first friend of Alexander Hamilton here in New York City. Hercules and Alexander Hamilton met in the Caribbean while doing business, and Hamilton, who was a Caribbean native, ended up moving to New York City and staying with Hercules Mulligan initially. Now, Hercules Mulligan was the very first official tailor of the U.S. government, and he was a big socialite who commiserated with the British and the American revolutionaries alike. However, while commiserating with the British soldiers here in New York City during the occupation, usually getting them drunk and filling them with amazing pastries, he would get secrets from these British soldiers and relay these secrets to the American government, specifically to his good old friend Alexander Hamilton. Here we have the gravestone of Robert Fulton, who was the inventor of probably one of the most revolutionary advancements in technology that has ever happened in the history of humanity back in the 1800s, and that was the steamship. Robert Fulton made the very first steamship that went right through the Hudson. Right before we have this huge torque here, we have the gravestone of Alexander Hamilton. And this is the first Secretary of Treasury here in the U.S. He basically built the U.S.'s, United States' financial system. Right next to it, we have Philip Hamilton, who was the son of Alexander Hamilton, who died in a duel shortly before Alexander Hamilton passed away. And the reason he passed away was because he actually was defending his father's honor. Now, in front of it, we have a gravestone of Eliza, who was the wife of Alexander Hamilton.
The real reason why Hamilton stopped for Here it is, the name of Alexander Hamilton. If you like a picture with it, I'm happy to oblige. I think it's a little morbid, but I don't really care, Sam. Stand right here. Got a photo, I think. Don't be there.
Here we have a statue of John Waltz, a very prominent New Yorker. Member of the 3rd State Congress, and later served in Westchester County and co-founded the Leake and Waltz Orphan House. And wow, here we also see, right above there, we see one of the World Trade Center buildings covered in a nebulous fog because of this rainy day, which makes it perfect for walking around a cemetery. So the cool thing is, when you're surrounded by all this architecture, it kind of gives you a sense of how New York City has grown throughout the years. You have here, we have Trinity Church. This iteration dates back to the early 1800s, but we're surrounded by these huge buildings that date back all the way from the 1870s, 1880s, and early 1900s. one of the very first skyscrapers over here along Wall Street. Beautiful Art Deco masterpiece. And then we have the burgeoning buildings that are completely overshadowing any of the buildings around here. The World Trade Center complex. Beautiful. Here we can see the more ornate details of the church on its side. Wow. Always look up in New York City. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in. This is located at Wall Street and Broadway, where you can visit Trinity Church and its graveyard. The church is being repaired, but you can visit the backside of the church in the chapel, which is right in the back. The entrance is around. And I hope you enjoyed this tour. Thank you everyone who's lending your support to Urbanist, becoming a Facebook supporter and getting access to these videos a week before anyone else. A month before anyone else. And for everyone watching afterwards, thank you so much for tuning in as well. I really appreciate it. Keep being awesome and always keep on exploring. Have a great day, everyone.